How's it going, everybody? This is Bobby G, aka Bobby Bookworm, back with another Saturday spiel. Granted, it's a little late. Sorry about that. I was really trying to think about the particular passages and how to really properly word this. For those of you who have not been here before, and by the way, this is also on YouTube, not just on my Instagram. Uh, so you can, go to YouTube and find Bobby Bookworm as well, and like, subscribe, share, and all that jazz. Which this is kind of new for me to say that, but given how the times are, I think I might as well put that out there. Anyway, the portion for this week, and also for those who don't know, I'm what you call a messianic Jew or Jewish believer in Yeshua, which is the Aramaic Hebrew name for Jesus, just so everybody knows. Um, but I will say that, you know, it's a lot of things to keep in mind. But anyway, the portion for this week is Parashat Bamidbar, which stands for in the wilderness. It starts with the book of Numbers. We're starting out Numbers chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 4, verse 20. Hosea chapter 2, verses 1 through 22. And Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 17. That's from TorahPortions.org. And Romans chapter 9, verses 22 and 23. And that's from Chosen People Ministries. For those who want to know the difference, TorahPortions.org is kind of a general spot. And Chosen People Ministries is part of a ministry that I'm a member at large of. And, these are different portions. And I really try to think about this, like I said, of how to really break down what these are. Well, first, what you have in the book of Numbers is you have basically a census being taken of the different tribes of Israel. And in particular, you have a tribe of Levi being taken census by itself. The reason for that is because the tribe of Levi is where we get the Kohen, or the Kohanim, which is the Hebrew word for priest or priests. It's also where we get the what we consider today basically a family of ministers, which would include the pastor, the elders, the deacons and deaconesses, and so on. And that's essentially what we're seeing here in Numbers, except in this case you got the priest and the Levites who are helping out. And you basically have a setup of, when you're in the wilderness, I mean, really you have a lot of time on your hands to figure out how things are going to be done. And keep in mind, to give the context of this, is that the Israelites have just been freed from Egypt, and they've never known anything except being under bondage, and now they're free. So it's a thing of, well, how do we live this free life as a people of God? And that's what they're trying to figure out in the wilderness. Well, Hosea, in his case, you have what is going on is the unfaithfulness of Israel and Judah, and Hosea is living in the time of the prophets, and there's a lot of tumultuous times, a lot of crazy times going on, and God picks him out and ends up having a wife who is a bit fast and loose, but God tells Hosea to be faithful to his wife anyway, and to have children by her, even though she's being fast and loose. And he uses his life, the life of the prophet Hosea, to speak of how even though he is a husband or has been a husband to Israel, to Judah, and they've been unfaithful, that he is still faithful to them regardless. And that's kind of the painting of the picture here. And we see a story of redemption is what we find. And that's also what we see of Yeshua, Jesus in the desert in Matthew, is we find him in the desert, and we find him, it's a well-known story to many, for those who are familiar with the scriptures, or those who've been to church very regularly in their lives, or even Messianic congregations such as myself, and, or in my case, both. But the story of Jesus was in the wilderness, Yeshua was in the wilderness, he was tempted for 40 days and 40 nights, ate no bread, drank no water, and eventually he was tempted by the enemy. Now, this is the thing I think it's very, very important is that in the wilderness, it's very tempted to give up on God. It's very tempting when a lot of stuff is being taken away from you. And there's a little bit of a touching on that in Romans chapter 9, verses 22 and 23, which in the context of that is Matthew of kind of what if God decided, because there's a lot of those questions. And I look at what's going on right now, and if you take all these passages together, some might wonder, well, how do all these passages fit together? Because that's one of the things that we do in both traditional synagogues and in my case in Messianic congregations is you try to figure out what is the connection, where's the crossover of these passages. And what we find is that in the times that we currently live in, it seems like we're very much in the desert because in the desert there's no food, there's no water. And in the case of the Israelites, they had to find, rivers and what have you, and they had to rely completely on God in the wilderness. And when I say they had to rely completely on God, I mean completely on God, period. And in this case, Yeshua, Jesus, is himself the Son of God, the second part of the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, all of that, and yet he is also human. And even in Paul talks about how he was tempted in every way as the rest of us and yet committed no sin. And we see this when he was in the wilderness. It is very tempting in the wilderness, in the deserts of our lives, including the times we currently live in, to give up on God. It's very tempting to walk away from God. It's very tempting to wonder, God, where are you? The thing is that in all these passages, if we look at the connection, the crossover, we find that the connection is that God is with us in spite of the desert. God is with us even when we have little to nothing. So I want you to keep that in mind these days, that even though it seems like we don't have much, even though it seems like we don't have nothing, and trust me, I've been to local grocery stores where I live, and a lot of the shelves are looking kind of lean. I'm not even going to try and, paint a rosy picture that everything is just hunky-dory when there's some challenges in the places that I live, and I'm sure as many who are watching this video live. And yet, God is with us even in the desert, even in the wilderness, when it seems like we don't have much. We still have God, and as God still made a way from the Israelites, as Yeshua persisted in the Lord, despite being tempted by the enemy, and despite Hosea's unfaithfulness of his wife, and as that symbology of the unfaithfulness of the Israelites toward God, God was still faithful in spite of that fact. So remember the faithfulness of God in spite of the wilderness, in spite of the unfaithfulness of our leaders, in spite of the unfaithfulness of some people in this country. And remember that God is still faithful anyway. This is my Saturday spiel. Lord willing, I will see you all next week. Shalom.